today. To start, the pandemic taught us a lot of things. It showed us the ingenuity of humanity and science. We were able to create vaccines in record time. There was the intention of collaboration with the creation of mechanisms like COVAX to share vaccines equitably. But the pandemic also showed us a few other less desirable things. We saw that Africa was effectively left behind in the race to acquire vaccines, therapeutics, diagnostics. We saw that sometimes the systems that were put in place for equitable distribution did not work as designed. And while it was a global response and we've looked at what indigenous CSOs can do, we want to look at what our governments internally can do and have done. It's not so much reflecting on what the rest of the world did to Africa or does to Africa. It's also reflecting on how we can sharpen our own responses on the continent. So it's an internal. We have Mr. Busayo Morakinyo. Busayo is the governance, transparency, and accountability expert with ingrained experience working on marginal grassroots community with connected development. He's worked with a network of over 7,000 youths demanding. Thank you. And Busayo, connected development follows the money. So tell us how the government did as far as the fund flow for the pandemic response here in Nigeria.
So immediately the pandemic hit, for us it was a signal because we're used to the Nigerian situation, and two contexts comes to mind. In 2012 there was a flood across the river Niger and river Benue, and we saw funds coming, but we didn't know how those funds were expended. So it was a red flag. When Ebola also hit, there was that consciousness, and the consciousness of what happened in the Northeast was also on the front burner, where we're able to get a whole lot of funds into the country, but the utilization of that fund was shrouded in a little kind of secrecy, which is kind of our realities around here. So one of the first things we did was that we started from the conversation around procurement, and the first meeting we had, which was very strategic, was with the Bureau of Public Procurement, because we were under a lockdown. For us, following the money involves we visualizing and tracking the funds, to the granular level. So we wanted to see the ventilators that were coming into the country. We wanted to see the PPEs that were coming into the country, but we're locked down, right? So we had to have a conversation with the Bureau of Public Procurement, ICPC. We invited the EFCC, we invited SERAP, we invited our friends from Procurement Monitors, that's Budeshi, PPDC, and we had that robust conversation. One of the things that happened was, within 24 hours after that conversation, the Bureau of Public Procurement released the emergency procurement guidelines. And it was very memorable for us because this was within 24 hours, after civil society guys requested for it. But much more than that was the fact that part of the guidelines was that immediately after the lockdown, that we're going to share with us the data of the entire procurement system, what happened, with emergency procurement because people couldn't move. Maybe we'll get that data tomorrow, but for now, we do not have that data. Another thing that happened that was very remarkable was the fact that, yes, government mobilized, the private sector mobilized, but unfortunately, we saw what happened, at the aftermath of the protests around the country where governments actually started hoarding these palliatives, quote and unquote. And it was very simple for us. We said to CACOVID, you've mobilized funds. We know the government. Why don't you bring us into the picture from the get-go so that we can be able to put a check on the government? Whilst we understood there was a health emergency, we had to pedal down a little and not be in people's faces because people were trying to survive COVID. It was very important that every dime that came into the country was supposed to be accounted for. Just about 2 weeks ago, we sent an FOI to the Ministry of Budgets and Planning, and we discovered that 52 tertiary health centers in this country got about 950 million naira each, and 52 of them. And I can tell you authoritatively that in some states, we cannot compare. When we compare notes, we cannot see what 950 million naira did, because some of them were supposed to create get new beds, get new facilities to be able to tackle COVID, and much more than that, prepare for another emergency, if it happens. So when it comes to the physical conversation, we think we've not really moved too far from where we used to be, which is a big concern. And just to say finally that we launched follow COVID money in about 7 other African countries. So I'm talking about Kenya, Malawi, Cameroon, Sierra Leone, Liberia, Ghana, and Nigeria. And the truth of the matter is, for example, Cameroon as of 2021, published how much they spent all through COVID-19. The same thing too with Malawi. In fact, in Malawi, we got the president to, fire one of his ministers for misappropriating COVID fund. But in Nigeria, largest country, in Africa, the last time we got our audit was from 2019. So it's telling me that the next time we're going to get an audit or get an audit that looks at what we spent during COVID, it's probably going to be in 2024, 2025.
So thank you so much, Busari. I'm hearing a checkered response. There was responsiveness. There was a national responsiveness. There was subnational spotty response. And there's an element of the resources and transparency in these. Busari, let me turn to you. Deficiency in government delivery and in our country's delivery. You started mentioning about some challenges around tracking the funds. In addition to tracking the funds, and you can shed more light on that, what else did you see as deficiency, especially as we prepare, looking to the future?
Yeah, I mean, while she was speaking, I was just here saying, everything she said was the truth. Now a bigger problem was the problem of distrust. Citizens didn't trust the government, so it was easy for conspiracy theories to come up. I know that we had to begin a series of radio shows across the country where we tried to dispel, all this myth around COVID. There were people who told me after the lockdown when we went to the field that COVID was a punishment from God to those people that are stealing Nigerians' money. And that's what they believed. They believed it was only big people that got. So when we get into a community, face masks, trying to ensure that we have sanitizers here and there, they laugh at us. There are some places, even, capitals of states where you were just going to be the only one using a face mask. People didn't believe. And the reason is not far-fetched from the fact that people didn't trust government. We had people also that said to us that government was just using it to make money. That if there was COVID in Nigeria, more people would have died because they saw the statistics and they felt, just few people died. And it's quite unfortunate when citizens do not trust their government. And you would also not want to blame the citizens. There had been points where the citizens listened to government and they were disappointed by the reaction of government. So a typical example, people died during COVID, and that's the truth. Now, but on TV, you saw where government organized burials, with people cramped up in a space, and someone would look at me and tell me, you said there's COVID, but look at the TV now, you have people, government officials, still going on campaigns with places packed up, to the fullest. And it was a bragging right for political parties to say, at my campaign rally, we had more people. But this was during COVID. Now, so it was easy for citizens to not want to care too much, what government was saying. Secondly, when it came to fiscal responsibility also, for example, we know that all the states in this country got 1 billion naira for COVID. Lagos State got 10 billion directly from the federal government. Kano State got 5 billion from the federal government. Now, the question is, what was the significant change those funds made in this state? Even the states that said there was no COVID, I'll call the state, Kogi State, they got 1 billion for COVID intervention. Now, from the federal government. Now, there was nothing to show on the ground that those funds were judiciously used to fight COVID. So it was easy for citizens to say, hey, leave this COVID story. People were just using it to make money. Another example was what I gave. We saw how people broke into warehouses, taking out stuff. We call them hoodlums or call them several names. But the truth of the matter is the moment people do not see that same level of commitment in terms of putting actions, to the words we hear from the government, the more citizens relax into themselves and say, hey, the government is up to their gimmicks once again. We did something else. We went around 15 states in this country, enumerating the primary health centers, in these 15 states. And it was terribly below par. Now, primary health centers are supposed to be the ones who, receive and store these vaccines and distribute the vaccines, right? So when we went to the field, we were trying to ask a few questions. What is the transportation of these vaccines like? What kind of vehicles are these vaccines transported in? In what temperature, were these vaccines transported in? Secondly, we were asking the simple question of the ability of these primary healthcare centers to store vaccines. Then thirdly, we're asking of the ability of these primary healthcare centers to evenly distribute vaccines. Now, one of the symposiums we held in Lagos State, together with budget under a project we called CTAP that covered these 7 African countries, the representative from Life Bank shared some damning realities with us. One of such was the fact that the transportation of those vaccines, in some instances, fell short of global best practices. So the temperature in which those vaccines were supposed to be stored, was actually not there. So in essence, what some health centers got were just empty vials. It was just water. Because the content of the vaccine was gone. And that's the truth. So you now begin to ask yourself a question. Did we have to wait till COVID before primary health centers were going to be standardized across the country? There is a minimum requirement for primary healthcare centers in Nigeria from the NPHCDA, for God's sake. So with all of these realities we saw on the field, sometimes it's now really difficult for us to try to convince citizens that, hey, you have to even go, to take vaccines. Secondly, are those vaccines readily available? There were some communities that got only 100 vials of vaccines, and a community that houses about 5,000 to 7,000 people with just 100 doses, and all. Those were the kind of experience we got on the field.
Thank you, Busayo. What I'm hearing is the best time, opaqueness breeds distrust, and we saw how distrust played a role in this pandemic. Busayo, let me move on to you. And let me hear you speak tactically. What, practically speaking, can civil society and citizens do to create that enabling environment for delivery now and in the future?
Check. Okay. Let me just add a layer to what you said about opacity. We always say that corruption thrives in opacity. And until you spotlight, that particular sector, then the sector begins to open up. I know that, probably I was still much more younger, when the fight for HIV, was at the highest level. But I think one of the things that probably worked was that partnership, that ability, that framework that spoke to partnership. So I think as members of the civil society, if we're not partnering, then we're not doing anything. We have to speak in one voice, and it's very important. If the focus is on this pandemic and future pandemics that will come, just as you've said, we need more of partnerships, and we need to begin to build those partnerships now, before we have another pandemic. I also want to say that I classify the civil society into two. The first one is the organized civil society, where, FHI 360 plays, where connected development, follow the money, one, all of us, organized civil society. There's another set of people that are very important. Those people are the people we should define as the larger civil society. They don't have a king. They don't have an executive director. They don't have, anything. They're just citizens of the country. And she said it very clearly. And if we must reiterate that fact, the only thing we can do, would probably be, would play the roles of the catalyst, bring up the conversation. But the people whose ability it is to run with that conversation are the everyday citizens. And the truth of the matter is, until there is that massive demand, there may not be that level of supply in reciprocity. So whilst we engage with the people in these communities, the communities must take ownership also of the process. So I say to my guys, it's not about us. We're just catalysts. We're probably funded. The moment the funding goes off, what happens? it behoves on the people who, live in these communities to begin to build resilient communities. So maybe the organized civil society can now begin to think about ways we can build the resilience of communities enough for them to begin to speak for themselves, and not we becoming their mouthpiece. That a whole lot of times, and it's not healthy. Our funding the government may shut down civil societies. It has happened, in other African countries. There's currently a fight against civil society organizations. If, God forbid, if they succeed, what happens? Community must be able to wake up now, to begin to build their own certain level of resilience, begin to engage with their government face to face. 2023 is here. The politicians are going to go back home. When they go back home, what is community saying to them? These are very important conversations, we need to begin to have now. And maybe lastly, I would say that, civil societies are not the kings of the sector. The organized civil society. We're not heroes, actually. The community people, the people in the communities are the heroes. We must teach them to do what we do. We must teach them advocacy. They may even become better tools for advocacy, or they may create indigenous tools for advocacy better than what we can give them. So the moment, I'm tempted to use power to the people, but it sounds like a slogan of a political party. But the moment these people own this process we have, then I think our jobs becomes easier and they can take ownership.
Thank you very much. Those are really sage words. So we're looking internally. Civil society are not the mouthpiece of the community. How do we build the community to be the mouthpiece of the community? How do we build resilient communities? How do we build partnerships so that civil society does not work in silos? Questions, or else we can go directly to Busaya. The floor is yours. So have you shared what you learned with other CSOs, and where's the money?
Yeah, so one of the things we did on the CETA project when we started was to set up a coalition, right? And this coalition involved connected development, budget, SERAP. It involved everyone, and we all came to the table. And good enough, we brought the Minister of State, for budget and national planning, Mr. Prince Clem Agba rather, and we had that robust conversation. And the question we asked him was, where is the money? Because for us, we track, we visualize, and we ensure that what is in the books is what is on ground. He made very open statements and made commitments also. So I must actually say that we sent them an FOI, the Ministry of Budget and National Planning. They responded to our FOI. That was great. We sent to the CBN as at June 2020. The CBN told us what they had gotten at the time was about 34-point-something billion, and they had expended 30 billion. But the problem is, we had, and good enough this time, we had some level of data. But the data we don't have now is expense data. What was the money spent on? So, for example, the Ministry of Budget has said to us, we have to go to the Ministry of Health. I would say, no, we're not going to the Ministry of Health. We are going granular on the field to see what 950 million, each to 52, tertiary institutions, what they were able to do with the money. So we have teams currently, tracking that level of funding, right? But the truth of the matter is, we alone, as connected development, or follow the, yes, we have an expansive network of people across the 36 states, and about 9 other international countries, African countries, but we cannot do it alone. So we're partnering with civil society organizations across border, and we're saying, hey, let's put hands together to ensure that even if we cannot get everything 100% to a certain level, let's be able to influence government's ability to bring everyone together. I also needed to correct a notion. I think one of the institutions that we must clap for was the NCDC. As it were, the NCDC was able to manage the crisis, but there's a misconception that funds went to NDDC. I don't speak for NCDC, but the truth of the matter is, the funds they got were more of operational funds. The other level of funds probably resided with the CBN, because COVID and the CBN had a certain level of partnership than the Ministry of Finance and all. And that's why I said, for us, our audit system is still archaic, is still backwards. Even countries that are performing poorly are doing better than Nigeria currently. So in Nigeria currently, what we're talking about is 2019 audits. And I said that at the beginning, you know, and I don't know when we're going to get to 2020 audits, 2021 audits, you know, probably 2022 audit. And I said, it's going to be in 2025. So our government institutions must be able to do more. And I liked what he said, you know, when he, and I had spoken to my colleagues about this, and this is something we need to begin to engage government on. We need to digitize the entire process of the civil service and even the public service. I should be able to send a mail, you know, to the Ministry of Health, and I get data from the Ministry of Health. I should be able to sit down in my house as a citizen, not even as a member of the organized civil society, and get information. We're definitely, you know, going to begin to collaborate across board to ensure that we do what we do best. Try to convince, advocate that we move government, you know, to the digital space. They embraced Zoom, courtesy of COVID. They should embrace more than Zoom. They should embrace, you know, that day-to-day process, you know, digitizing the process. But maybe finally from my end, I also want to say that, you know, where there is no information, there's bound to be fake news. One of the things the government hammers on is fake news, blah, blah, blah. And I say to myself, one of the reasons why fake news will keep thriving is the absence of real news. You know, so if the government can be able to, and we're ready to partner with the government, sincerely, we've helped government build their own institutions in terms of data gathering, you know, data visualization, and how they can be able to use data. We can not do everything for government, and that's why government is government. And I said, put all the civil society organizations together today, we may not be able to do what one state government would do in less than an hour, and that's the truth. And there's also a difference between what happens in the federal government and subnational government. State governments are still fighting the use of FOIs in their states. There's a case in the Supreme Court, unfortunately it's my state, Ondo State, that is in the Supreme Court fighting the use of freedom of information request, right? So much more than even digitizing these things, we still need to answer questions at the subnational level. It's pretty chilled at the federal level, but when we go down, and when you even go to the local governments, you know, it's better imagined, you know, than experienced.
Thank you. Now, Busayo, I'm going to you, but before I go to Busayo, I just want to let us all know in the room that we're all part of CSO. So I'm coming to you for your own statements. If folks have some things that we must add to the statement, please raise your hand and we'll come to you. For our panelists, Busayo, you have the last word from our panelists. What should we include in a statement? What is Africa asking for, especially from the CSO perspective?
Yeah, I mean, I want to digress a little from what is Africa going to ask for to what, you know, Africa has to do within. And I support your position. You know, we have to first of all look within. You know, we have to deliberately invest in research. We have to deliberately invest in innovation, best practices. For God's sakes, we have a whole lot of universities in Nigeria currently. You know, what are we getting out of those universities? The researches that are done, you know, NYC has at least 92,000 people who go to serve probably quarterly in this country. Chunk of them are science-related courses. What is the perspective of our education? You know, speaking to self-sustainability. The truth of the matter is he who pays the piper dictates the tune. If we keep going pants in hands to beg money from the international, you know, space, which is obviously not a problem. I don't have a problem with it. You know, sincerely, you know, we should be able to do more to invest in ourselves. We have the human capacity. What we just need are just the right infrastructures put in place. We can generate our own vaccines here. Sincerely, we can do that here. So as we go out, you know, to speak, you know, I think we should also add, you know, that Africans have the capacity, the human resources. What we just need is for the governments around Africa to create that enabling environment, you know, for us to do what we have to do from here, so that we don't keep begging for funds or begging for, you know, these IPs and all of this. I think we have the capacity here.
Self-sufficiency.